Good morning. I'm Nova Blake, and this is your complete political briefing for Friday, May 1st, 2026. Today, Iran's currency collapses to a historic low of 1.8 million rials to the dollar. Defense Secretary Hegseth claims the war powers' 60-day clock stops during a ceasefire, and the Supreme Court hears arguments that could strip legal protections from 350,000 Haitian and 6,000 Syrian immigrants. Let's get into it, starting with the top stories from across the American political landscape. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth offered a new and legally untested interpretation of the War Powers resolution during Senate Armed Services Committee testimony Thursday, claiming that the 60-day clock required to obtain congressional authorization for the Iran war stops or pauses during a ceasefire. Hegseth testified alongside Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane and Pentagon Comptroller Jules Hurst in a hearing that at times turned acrimonious, with Democratic senators accusing Hegseth of lying, mismanagement, and incompetence. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, who has led repeated war powers votes, flatly rejected Hegseth's ceasefire clock theory, saying he does not believe the statute supports that interpretation. The War Powers resolution does not contain any language providing for a pause in the 60-day clock during ceasefires, and legal scholars have broadly characterized Hegseth's argument as novel and unsupported by the text of the law. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments Thursday in a case that could strip temporary protected status, known as TPS, from approximately 350,000 Haitians and 6,000 Syrians living legally in the United States. The 6 conservative justices appeared sympathetic to the Trump administration's position that the executive branch has broad authority to end TPS designations, while the 3 liberal justices raised sharp concerns about the consequences for families and communities across America. A ruling in favor of the administration would allow the government to proceed with deportation proceedings for TPS holders in both countries. The Trump administration's own State Department currently lists both Haiti and Syria on its do not travel list, citing extreme security conditions. Iran's currency collapsed to a historic record low on Wednesday, trading at 1.8 million rials to one United States dollar, a rate more than double what it was just 1 year ago, when the exchange rate stood at approximately 811,000 rials to the dollar. The rial had remained relatively stable in the early weeks of the war, but has been in free fall since the naval blockade tightened. Iran's annual inflation rate reached 53.7% in the most recent government data, the highest rate recorded since 1943. With point-to-point inflation standing at 73.5%. The price of chicken rose 75% in the past month alone, beef and lamb by 68%, and many dairy products by as much as 50%, according to Iranian media reports. The Pentagon revealed Thursday that Operation Epic Fury, the American military campaign against Iran, has cost United States taxpayers $25 billion to date, with most of that expenditure concentrated in munitions. Pentagon Comptroller Jules Hurst disclosed the figure during House Armed Services Committee testimony Wednesday. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut pressed Hurst on whether the $25 billion figure includes the cost of repairing damage to United States military bases in the Middle East and replacing destroyed or depleted equipment, and suggested the true total cost could be 4 times higher or more. The $25 billion figure does not include the forthcoming Iran war supplemental spending request, which defense officials have estimated between $80 billion and $100 billion. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska announced Thursday she plans to introduce a measure on whether to formally authorize President Trump's war with Iran if she does not see a credible plan from the White House within the next week. Murkowski said she does not accept that the United States should engage in open-ended military action without clear direction or accountability. She is one of 3 Republican senators, along with Susan Collins of Maine and Tom Tillis of North Carolina, who have publicly demanded either a formal authorization for use of military force or an AUMF or a credible exit plan from the administration. The White House said Thursday it is in active conversations with Congress about the war powers question. United States prosecutors indicted Sinaloa Governor Rubén Rocha Moya and 9 other Mexican officials Thursday on charges that they helped the Sinaloa drug cartel traffic drugs into the United States in exchange for bribes and political favors. Federal prosecutors alleged that Rocha Moya met with the sons of former cartel leader Joaquin El Chapo Guzman before his 2021 election and promised to install officials friendly to their operations, while cartel members stole ballot boxes and intimidated opponents to ensure his election. Rocha Moya, the highest-ranking member of Mexico's ruling Morena party to be indicted by the United States, denied all the allegations. The indictments represent the most sweeping American prosecution of sitting Mexican elected officials in the history of the two countries' relationship. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry announced Thursday he plans to delay the state's May 16th primary election to give state lawmakers time to redraw Louisiana's congressional districts following Wednesday's Supreme Court Voting Rights Act ruling, which struck down Louisiana's existing congressional map. The Supreme Court's decision in Calais versus Louisiana specifically labeled Louisiana's current district lines as an unconstitutional racial gerrymander, meaning the state must draw new lines before holding federal elections. Absentee voting for the May 16th primary is already underway, and early in-person voting is set to begin this weekend. Legal challenges to any delay are expected, but Republicans said they are confident they can pause the process. Senate Republicans voted 51-47 on Tuesday to kill a Democratic war powers resolution that would have required President Trump to obtain congressional approval before continuing to blockade Cuba. Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania was the only Democrat to vote with Republicans. Senators Susan Collins of Maine and Rand Paul of Kentucky were the only Republicans to cross party lines in support of the Democratic resolution. The Cuba blockade, separate from the Iran war blockade, has plunged the island into a severe energy crisis, leaving millions without reliable power or clean water, according to humanitarian organizations monitoring conditions on the ground. President Trump said Thursday he is considering reducing United States troop levels in Spain and Italy, two NATO allies who have been among the most vocal European critics of the Iran war. Asked by reporters about the possibility, Trump said they haven't been exactly on board and did not elaborate. The statement came as Trump is simultaneously managing tensions with multiple European allies over American tariffs, the Iran war, and intelligence sharing arrangements. Italy's government suspended its defense cooperation agreement with Israel earlier this month, and Spain has been among the loudest European critics of American military operations in Iran. The USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier, the most advanced warship in the United States Navy and a key asset in the Iran war, is being pulled from the region for badly needed repairs after 10 months at sea. The carrier's departure reduces the American military's offensive firepower in the Persian Gulf region at a critical moment, as the Iran ceasefire remains fragile and peace talks remain stalled. No replacement carrier has been publicly confirmed for the Ford's position. The decision highlights the strain the Iran war has placed on American naval assets, particularly as the military simultaneously attempts to enforce the Strait of Hormuz blockade, maintain presence in the Pacific near Taiwan, and support operations elsewhere around the world. Now turning to Washington and the latest actions from the current administration. Here are 10 significant developments from the administration this week. The Trump administration argued before the Supreme Court Thursday that it has broad statutory authority to cancel temporary protected status designations for Haitians and Syrians without judicial interference, with the court's 6 conservative justices appearing receptive to the administration's position during oral arguments. A ruling in the administration's favor would allow it to revoke TPS from approximately 350,000 Haitians and 6,000 Syrians, placing them at risk of deportation. The court is expected to issue its ruling before the end of June. The TPS program, in place since 1990, provides humanitarian relief to people from countries reeling from war, natural disasters, and other catastrophes. The Pentagon's confirmation that Operation Epic Fury has cost $25 billion is the first public official dollar figure attached to the Iran war, and it arrived during a 2-day marathon of congressional testimony by Defense Secretary Hegseth. Senator Blumenthal questioned whether the true cost is 4 times higher when equipment damage, base repairs, and other indirect costs are factored in. Hegseth characterized the operation as a major success and defended the military's munitions stockpile as in good shape, despite earlier reports that half of American Patriot missile interceptors had been expended. Hegseth also dismissed as defeatist those lawmakers who questioned the war's costs and strategy. Hegseth's novel claimed Thursday that the War Powers' 60-day clock pauses during a ceasefire has no precedent in the text of the 1973 War Powers Resolution and drew immediate pushback from legal scholars and Democratic senators. The White House said Thursday it is in active conversations with Congress on the War Powers issue, but has still not formally invoked the 30-day extension provision, submitted an AUMF request, or provided Congress with a written certification of unavoidable military necessity. The administration's refusal to address the deadline directly has drawn growing frustration from Republican Senators Collins, Tillis, and Murkowski. Senator Murkowski's announcement Thursday that she will introduce an AUMF authorization measure if the White House does not present a credible war plan within 1 week sets a new internal Republican deadline that coincides with May 7th or 8th. Murkowski said she does not accept open-ended military action without accountability. The Trump administration has not formally submitted its estimated $80 billion to $100 billion war supplemental funding request to Congress, and Republican leaders cannot advance that request without also resolving the war authorization question. The convergence of these deadlines is creating the most serious internal Republican pressure the administration has faced since the war began on February 28th. Trump's statement Thursday that he is considering pulling troops from Spain and Italy adds a new dimension to the growing transatlantic tensions over the Iran war. European allies have largely opposed the war, with France, Spain, Italy, and Germany all calling for negotiations rather than military escalation. Italy suspended its defense cooperation with Israel this month. Spain has consistently called for a ceasefire at the United Nations Security Council. Trump's suggestion that the United States could reduce its military footprint at Allied bases in southern Europe as punishment for their opposition reflects the administration's willingness to use troop deployments as diplomatic leverage, even with long-standing NATO partners. Iran's currency freefall to 1.8 million rials per dollar represents the most dramatic economic consequence of the war and blockade to date. The United States blockade has cut off Iran's primary source of hard currency, oil exports, while secondary sanctions have constrained Iran's ability to conduct financial transactions with China, the Gulf states, and other trading partners. Iran's bilateral trade with China dropped 50% year-over-year in the first quarter of 2026. Iran's government has estimated that more than 1 million people have lost their jobs since the war began, with bomb damage reported to more than 23,000 factories and businesses across the country. The Senate's killing Tuesday of the Democratic War Powers resolution on Cuba, on a vote of 51 to 47, marks the latest in a series of successful Republican efforts to prevent Congress from exercising its war powers authority over the administration's military and blockade operations. The Cuba blockade, which the administration has conducted separately from and concurrently with the Iran naval blockade, has plunged Cuba into a humanitarian crisis. The Democratic resolution would have required the president to obtain congressional authorization to continue the Cuba naval blockade. The only Republican supporters were Senators Collins and Paul, consistent with their positions on the Iran War Powers votes. The Louisiana primary delay announced by Governor Landry Thursday creates an immediate legal and logistical crisis. Absentee voting was already underway when the Supreme Court struck down the state's congressional map. Election lawyers said any delay will face immediate court challenges from voters, candidates, and civic organizations. The Supreme Court's ruling in Calais versus Louisiana specifically required the state to draw new district lines, and the state's Republican legislature is expected to convene quickly to produce a new map that satisfies the court's standard under the newly narrowed Voting Rights Act interpretation. The new map will almost certainly eliminate Louisiana's second majority black congressional district. The USS Gerald Ford's withdrawal from the Persian Gulf region for repairs removes the most powerful offensive naval platform from the Iran war theater at a fragile diplomatic moment. The carrier has been at sea for 10 consecutive months, far beyond a typical deployment cycle. Its departure was not publicly announced in advance. The administration has also not yet announced whether a replacement carrier will be dispatched to the region, leaving the American naval presence in the area composed primarily of smaller destroyers and the existing blockade enforcement vessels. FIFA President Gianni Infantino reaffirmed Thursday at the FIFA Congress in Vancouver that Iran will participate in the 2026 FIFA World Cup, which is being co-hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and will play its matches on American soil. Infantino's statement drew applause from delegates. Iran was the only FIFA member association not present at the Congress, after its delegation reported a member was denied entry into Canada. The announcement creates a significant security and logistical challenge for American authorities, who would be responsible for protecting Iranian athletes and fans at World Cup venues on American soil, while the two countries remain in a state of active military conflict and diplomatic standoff. That's your full briefing for Friday, May 1st, 2026. I'm Nova Blake. Stay informed, stay ahead. We'll see you next time.